Catriona Stewart, and I'm writer-at-large with The Herald. I'm joined this afternoon by Caroline Wilson, who's senior reporter at The Herald, and we are going to be having a chat with Stuart Robertson, who is the director of the Mackintosh Society. This week, The Herald is taking a deep dive into the circumstances around the two fires at the Glasgow School of Art, one in 2014 and then the more devastating second fire in 2018. We are going to be having a look at what happened in both those years, the governance of the schools, the political will to rebuild the Mackintosh, whether it should be rebuilt, and there'll be opinion and analysis and a deep dive into the issues. But for the next 15 minutes, we're going to have a chat with Stuart and get his views about some of the issues that we're raising in the series this week. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline to ask some questions of Stuart.
Thanks, Kat. Good afternoon, Stuart.
Hi, Caroline.
Stuart, take us back to the time that Charles Rennie Mackintosh would have been commissioned to build the art school.
Yeah, well, there was a competition in 1896 to build a new art school on Renfrew Street, and at the time I think they had a budget of about £14,000, but those who were looking at the competition realised that you wouldn't be able to build the whole school for that cost. So it was eventually agreed to build the first section, east section, to be the first part of the building, and then they were going to invest money to buy to be able to build the second part of the art school. So you had two parts of the art school over a 10-year period.
And how significant was the building, Stuart? If you can just talk us through that. Were the eyes of the world on Glasgow?
Well, Mackintosh at the time wasn't a partner in the practice, so the actual competition entry was by Honeyman and Keppie, who were the major partners in the practice. So Mackintosh went a wee bit under the curve on that, although he worked closely and he was very much Fran Newbery had great aspirations for Mackintosh, and there was a good relationship there. So I think that aspect of, at the time, it was quite modern. I think if the building had been built in one piece, it would have been a different building. It would have been very much arts and crafts throughout. But that 10-year period, you're seeing Mackintosh evolve, and the second stage of the art school, you're coming from arts and crafts into sort of Art Deco nearly. If you look at the west wing of the art school. So it was a very forward-thinking building. Mackintosh was an artist. He knew what artists required. So the actual north section has these fantastic windows, which were in artists like Northern Light. So you had the ideal architect designing the building. And at the time, there was a lot of criticism about it, because I think people were used to a lot more ornamentation, because the south side of the building was very much in Harling and in sort of bare in comparison. But Mackintosh was very much influenced by he was very critical of architecture that had gone before. He was critical of Greek and Roman architecture in Scotland. He felt Scotland had its own architectural heritage of castle and baronial style, and he wanted to take that forward in a modern context. So the School of Art is that real sort of creation of Mackintosh, and it's always been very much used as Mackintosh masterpiece. And at the time, it might have come under criticism, but if you look to 2009, when the RIBA did a competition to see what was the best architecture designed by a British architect in the last 175 years, and the Glasgow School of Art won that competition. And even at that time, or prior to that time, the school was doing an analysis of its campus, and there was only one building that was fit for purpose, and that was the Mackintosh building. So you have an architect who's created a masterpiece that even over 100 years later, it was still fully functioning as an art school.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you a bit about the controversy, Stuart, because obviously this is an iconic building for Glasgow and a greatly loved building. But I'm thinking back to when the Reed building just across the road from the Mac was built. There was quite a bit of controversy around that, and it took a while for people to be won over to that building and its design. How did the Mackintosh building, once it was completed, how was it received? And did it take a little bit to sort of win over the Glasgow public and the wider Scottish public?
Yeah, I think I think there was an element. I think it's just people, anything that's new or change, or maybe not going with the flow of architecture that's around there, is always going to under some sort of criticism. And I think Mackintosh didn't design lots and lots of buildings. He only had a handful of real good patrons that understood him. And I think he must have affected him at the time of some of the criticism that was going on. But I suppose it's that aspect that it takes a while for a building to start being loved. And if you look at people that have worked or studied in the art school, they have that affinity, that affection for the building. So it's always hard for people from looking from the outside in, looking at the school and going, oh, that's strange, or that style of the building and how he's done that. So to some extent, you're always going to get that in an evolution of a new building. Yeah.
So Stuart, obviously our series is focused on the two fires that happened in 2014 and then the more devastating one in 2018. Where were you at the time of both fires?
Oh, it's that time and place. It's a bit like JF Kennedy death and that aspect. It's the first fire in 2014. I was taking a tour group around Glasgow for Mackintosh, and we were having lunch in the Corinthian at the time, and my phone was going crazy, and I had to arrange for the group to go off and do their own thing while I was getting called by the press to go up to the art school to handle questions during the first fire. The second fire, it was during Mackintosh's 150th anniversary. It was we were looking at it as it was a new beginning for Mackintosh, with the school not far away from completion after the first fire, and we were doing a concert in Queen's Cross Church at the time, and I left about 11 o'clock, and it was a bit strange. I'm not sure. I came down the bottom of Mary Hill, and I looked over towards the Garnet Hill, and I could see some sort of mist. It was a bit strange. I was going, should I go and investigate? But I went home. I was tired, and then I got home. My daughter texted me to say the art school's on fire, and I was completely I couldn't believe it. I was, and I stayed up that night. I think I'd spoken to you before that I get calls the following day, and I think I spent 3 hours handling press from international press, television, the whole of the next morning, and dealing with all that. And the whole week I actually was in and out of the BBC handling questions about the art school. So it was sort of cathartic dealing with all that, getting everything thrown at you, that was my something I'll never forget.
Obviously, efforts are now focused on another rebuild. Stuart, how important is the rebuild of the MAC? Is it something we should be fighting for?
I think it is. I think it's just a shame that the time period it's taken. It's the art schools. Yeah, it's a world-class building. It's so important. You've seen it. You've seen things like in Germany or during the war of rebuilding buildings that were either bombed or damaged during the war. And the art school is a really important. But Mackintosh is like Gaudi to Barcelona, and Frank Lloyd. Forgot his name now.
Right.
Frank Lloyd Wright from Chicago. They're all important, and Mackintosh is up there with them. And the building has a huge importance. Our people talk about our castles and such, but there's a building, the art school, that was functioning. It was loved around the world. And then you've got all sorts of said. I think Brad Pitt was involved in after the first fire, and Peter Capaldi. And Brad Pitt's a big fan of Mackintosh, so you've just got that connection around the world of how important Mackintosh is, and that building has to be rebuilt. It's also would be a great catalyst for Circuit Hall Street, and to do something where all our cities are struggling just now, and I think that building is so important.
And Stuart, when you say rebuilt, what do you mean? Do you mean a replica? Do you mean a new design that maybe takes into account the changes in the way that students learn and are taught, and the different disciplines that they are involved in at the art school now?
But that's a bit controversial. I think the building had changed about how the studios were used, but I think the school's planning to correct a lot of that. I think there's some aspects over the years, like the library was very much hands off. It was a sort of protected area. I think it has to be a sort of fully functioning school, and I think it can come back to as close as possible to how Mackintosh been. And I think the education side has to be evolved a little bit how you do that. But there's other options about using. I mean, I think you've got a lot of artists that have studied there in the past and who have said it's the best studios they've ever worked in to paint or do that. So what's the point of correcting it and changing it to modern? I mean, the Stephen Hall building opposite was built more recently. It's not in the same calibre as the Mackintosh building.
And I guess there's a whole generation of students now coming to the art school that are missing out on that experience of learning in the Mac building. Stuart, what are they missing out on?
Well, I was trying to remember the artist. It was Alison Watson made the comment about it was the best. I think they're missing out. Just that feeling of walking in the building. There's a comment that you don't need tutors in that building because Mackintosh is teaching you all the way. He plays games with you. It's just a magical building. I think it's like all the Mackintosh buildings, like Queen's Cross. There's something about it that it's got a life in its own.
One of the comments that was made on X, formerly Twitter, today, Stuart, is that some people care more about the loss of the O2 ABC building. I wondered what your response is to that.
I think all our heritage buildings are important. I mean, I think Glasgow is in a poor state just now. We're running a symposium on the 6th and 7th of June. It's the Mackintosh Symposium, but Heritage Under Threat. And I think we're a very time critical of all the heritage buildings in the city, not just Mackintosh. And the city has to waken up to that. It uses our architectural heritage as an attraction to come and visit Glasgow, but it needs to have financial support to do that. And without that, Glasgow will lose all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Do you think that there's been enough political pressure and political will and media pressure around resolving the future of the Mac, given that we're so many years down the line, everything seems quite a bit up in the air? Have we been too complacent in pushing for the restoration of the Mackintosh building?
It's just about the money and the time frame on that. I mean, I think it'd be good to get more communications from the school. I think there's a lot going on that's not always been communicated, and I think that would be benefit to stop all the negatives that go on with the actual school in working together. I think there's something about life. Everybody loves to be negative about everything. It's like, well, it's the royal family or what aspect, but it'd be nice to be a bit more positive and people working together and saying, yeah, let's get this school built. It's really important, and it'll be a great sort of benefit for the city, not just for students coming into the city, but just for the whole heritage aspect as well.
And when I'd spoken to you, Stuart, you talked about the idea of somehow connecting the new Mac to Sauchiehall Hall Street. Have you got any ideas about how that could be achieved?
If it was my one vision, I think because shopping and all that's on such a decline, I think you have to recreate new attractions in the city, and that can be museums, art galleries, and all sorts of elements to bring people into the city. Something like a Mackintosh Design Museum. There's a lot of pieces of Mackintosh that's locked away and hidden, and that would be a benefit, a sort of benefit to or sort of for Sauchiehall Hall Street, for it just to come to life again. And I think it really needs that. And I think you've got Mackintosh at the Willow just down the road there. But there's a number of buildings. But I think something like opening up and creating a world-class Mackintosh museum would be a great benefit in that locality. The ABC, okay, the ABC might be gone, but there's an opportunity to do something wonderful in the city. Yeah. But we need vision. We need vision. I think that's currently what the city doesn't have. We don't have MD visionary driving the city. Just look at Manchester and Andy Burnham and the comparisons there of a city that's a lot more dynamic. We seem to have sort of nearing a death knell within Glasgow.
And that's certainly a message that we hear from various people that we speak to, this idea of a vision for Glasgow. And it's something that we'll be exploring as part of the Art School series this week. You can have a look at all of our content, all of our stories online at heraldscotland.com. And do also buy a paper. We have some fantastic splashes this week in front pages and lots of great Art School content. Stuart, thank you so much for your time, and Caroline, thank you as well.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.